The horizon was still dark when the radar operators at Combat Information Center aboard USS Lee first detected the swarm. It was April 6, 1945, and the men stationed 16 miles from the main body of Task Force 58 knew exactly what those blips meant. Hundreds of them, perhaps more. The Japanese were coming, and this time they were coming to die. Below the bridge, in compartments thick with cigarette smoke and tension, young sailors loaded ammunition into the 5-inch guns. The shells were different from anything they'd handled before. Inside each one, miniaturized radio transmitters hummed with purpose. These weren't ordinary projectiles. They were thinking weapons, equipped with an innovation that would reshape naval warfare forever. The designation on the boxes read VT, though most sailors simply called them proximity fuses. What they represented was the culmination of 3 years of desperate scientific struggle, a technological breakthrough born from the marriage of theoretical physics and industrial ruthlessness. The story of how these fuses came to exist began far from the Pacific, in the corridors of Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory in 1940. Dr. Torney, Merl Tuve and his team had been tasked with solving an almost impossible problem. Anti-aircraft gunners faced an agonizing challenge. They had to calculate the exact distance to a moving target, estimate where it would be in the next few seconds, and set mechanical timers on their shells accordingly. The margin for error was microseconds. The result was that conventional anti-aircraft fire achieved success rates of only 2%. Against the new threat of suicide aircraft, such ineffectiveness would be catastrophic. Tuve's solution was elegant in its simplicity, but staggering in its technical demands. A miniature radio transmitter and receiver would be built into the shell itself. As the projectile flew through the air, it would broadcast radio waves. When those waves bounced off an aircraft and returned, the Doppler shift in frequency would tell the fuse exactly how close the target was. The moment the distance became critical, the fuse would detonate automatically. No calculations, no guesswork, just physics and electronics working in perfect coordination. The engineering challenges seemed insurmountable. The fuse had to contain approximately 130 electronic components, all miniaturized to fit within a space smaller than a pint of milk. Every component had to be manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. When fired from a 5-inch gun, the shells would experience acceleration forces of 20,000 times gravity. They would reach 2,600 feet per second while spinning at 25,000 revolutions per minute through the gun's rifling. The projectile would endure temperature swings from 100 degrees Fahrenheit to minus 50 degrees, all while maintaining perfect electronic function. The tiny glass vacuum tubes manufactured by Sylvania had to be specially formulated to withstand this violence. Battery systems using exotic electrolytes had to activate instantly upon firing after remaining dormant for months in storage. The radio frequency had to be precisely calibrated to minimize interference while maximizing detection range. For 3 years, Tuve's team wrestled with these challenges. In January 1943, they got their first chance to prove the concept worked. Off Guadalcanal, USS Helena fired proximity-fused shells for the first time in combat. Lieutenant Red Cochran commanded the aft 5-inch battery. His second salvo at a Japanese Naval dive bomber detonated without direct impact. The shells simply passed close enough to the aircraft to trigger the fuse, and fragments tore the plane apart. That single success vindicated everything the laboratory had attempted. By 1945, American industrial capacity had been mobilized into a vast machine dedicated to producing proximity fuses. Crosley Corporation alone manufactured 525,930 of them, representing 24% of total production. But Crosley was just one player in an ecosystem of 87 different firms operating 1110 factories across the nation. RCA, Eastman Kodak, General Electric, McQuay Norris, and dozens of other companies contributed components or assembled complete units. The scale was staggering. American factories were producing 70,000 proximity fuses daily by June 1945. The total investment exceeded $1 billion in 1940s currency. By the time of the Okinawa campaign, over 15 million proximity fuses had been manufactured for naval use in the Pacific Theater. The cost per fuse had dropped dramatically through mass production efficiencies from $7.32 in 1942 to just 18 by 1945. American forces had increased proximity fuse allocation to 75% of all anti-aircraft ammunition, up from 25% in 1943. Every destroyer, cruiser, and battleship in Task Force 58 carried thousands of VT-fused 5-inch shells as their primary defense against the threat that had fundamentally changed the nature of Japanese military strategy. That threat had been born from catastrophe. Following devastating defeats at the Mariana Islands and the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Japanese Navy had lost most of its experienced pilots and aircraft carriers. The nation's air superiority had evaporated. Conventional tactics, which had once been devastatingly effective, now led only to wholesale slaughter. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, commander of the 1st Air Fleet, had proposed a radical solution in October 1944, transform remaining inexperienced pilots into precision-guided weapons. They would not attempt to escape. They would fly directly into American ships, and their aircraft would become bombs. The mathematics seemed to support the concept. While conventional air attacks achieved hit rates of only 2%, early kamikaze attacks in the Philippines had achieved success rates exceeding 34%. A single pilot flying a Zero fighter carrying a 250-kilogram bomb could potentially sink a destroyer, trading one life and one obsolete aircraft for hundreds of American casualties and millions of dollars in damaged warships. From the perspective of a nation facing overwhelming material disadvantage, the exchange rate seemed favorable. The pilots selected for these special attack units underwent abbreviated training that emphasized spiritual preparation over flying skills. Many had fewer than 100 hours of flight time compared to the 500 or more hours that pilots had possessed at Pearl Harbor. They learned basic navigation, ship recognition, and most critically, the diving approach that might evade anti-aircraft fire. Before each mission, they participated in ceremonial sake toasts, received samurai swords or rising sun headbands, and wrote final letters to their families. The Japanese military attempted to transform them into willing martyrs through a combination of Bushido philosophy, emperor worship, and what military leaders characterized as noble sacrifice. Yet spiritual preparation could not overcome what awaited them over Okinawa. The most terrifying expression of the kamikaze concept was the Baka, a piloted bomb that American sailors nicknamed the Fool. This weapon carried a 1,200-kilogram warhead powered by 3 solid-fuel rocket motors. In terminal dive, it could reach 505 miles per hour, making it nearly impossible to track with conventional fire control. But it had a fatal weakness. Its range was barely 10 miles, which meant the vulnerable Betty bombers carrying it had to fly directly into the teeth of American defenses to launch their cargo. The American defensive architecture around Okinawa was designed to layer protection in concentric rings. Radar picket destroyers positioned 16 miles from the main fleet served as early warning systems and bore the brunt of initial attacks. Each destroyer carried 12 to 16 5-inch guns capable of firing proximity, fused shells, creating overlapping fields of fire. The proximity fuse transformed these weapons from area denial systems into precision instruments. A 5-inch VT shell had a lethal burst radius of 70 feet compared to just 20 feet for time-fused shells. More critically, the fuse eliminated the complex calculations required for conventional anti-aircraft fire. Gunners could engage targets immediately upon detection, without waiting for range officers to calculate distances and set mechanical timers. Operation Kikusui. Number 1 involved 524 aircraft in total. The Japanese Navy committed 215 aircraft to suicide missions, while the Army provided 82 more. An additional 227 conventional aircraft would provide support. In terms of sheer numbers, it was an impressive display of force. But it was flying into a technological ambush. At 0600 hours on April 6th, radar operators began tracking the incoming formations. Radar picket destroyers opened fire at maximum range, 12,000 yards. The proximity fuses proved devastatingly effective. Unlike conventional time-fused shells that required precise range estimation, the VT fuses turned near misses into kills. Each shell that passed within lethal range of an aircraft automatically detonated, filling the sky with steel fragments. The Japanese pilots, expecting to have warning time to maneuver, instead found themselves flying through seemingly solid walls of exploding shells that appeared with uncanny accuracy. USS Laffey came under concentrated attack by 22 aircraft over an 80-minute period. The destroyer's gunners fired 345 rounds of 5-inch VT ammunition, destroying 9 attackers outright. The proximity fuses allowed Laffey's guns to engage multiple targets simultaneously, switching rapidly between aircraft without the delays required for manual fuse setting. When Kamikaze pilots attempted their standard tactic of approaching at wave-top height to avoid radar detection, the VT fuses proved equally effective, detonating when shells passed close to the sea surface and creating walls of fragments that shredded low-flying aircraft. Despite this devastating defensive fire, Laffey was struck by 6 kamikaze aircraft and 4 bombs. She survived, a testament to both American damage control and the fact that proximity fuses had prevented many more attackers from reaching their target. Post-battle analysis revealed the mathematical superiority of proximity-fused ammunition. Time-fused 5-inch shells required an average of 1,062 rounds to destroy each kamikaze aircraft. Proximity-fused shells reduced this requirement to 30-10 rounds per kill, a nearly 4-fold improvement in effectiveness. This differential meant that American ships could now defend themselves with a fraction of the ammunition that would have been required just months earlier. In optimal conditions, the results were even more dramatic. The destroyer escort, USS Abercrombie, destroyed a kamikaze with just 2 VT rounds in May 1945. The destroyer USS Morrison, defending against a massive kamikaze attack on May 4th, shot down 8 attackers in minutes using proximity-fused ammunition before being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots was profound. Those who aborted their missions and returned to base reported the terrifying experience of approaching American task forces through what seemed like solid walls of exploding shells. The distinctive black puffs of VT explosions appeared with uncanny accuracy, as if the American gunners could see exactly where each aircraft would be. Japanese tactical doctrine had assumed that high-speed, low-altitude approaches would minimize exposure to anti-aircraft fire. The proximity fuse invalidated these assumptions entirely. Shells that would have missed by 50 feet with conventional fuses now detonated lethally close, turning the final approach into a gauntlet of precisely timed explosions. Vice Admiral Matome Yugaki, directing kamikaze operations from Kyushu, noted in his diary the increasingly devastating effectiveness of American anti-aircraft defenses. By late April 1945, Japanese naval intelligence estimated that fewer than 1 in 4 kamikaze aircraft were reaching their targets, compared to 1 in 3 during the Philippines campaign. The difference was primarily attributed to what Japanese reports described as new type anti-aircraft shells that seemed to explode with impossible accuracy. Ugaki wrote in frustration, "The enemy's defensive firepower has increased remarkably. Our special attack aircraft are being destroyed at distances we previously considered safe." Individual American sailors operating 5-inch guns with VT ammunition became legends within their task forces. On the destroyer USS Hugh W. Hadley during the May 11th attack, gun crews claimed 17 confirmed kamikaze kills using proximity-fused ammunition. The gunners developed a technique of leading kamikaze aircraft with continuous fire, creating a wall of VT explosions that attacking aircraft had to fly through. Their gun crews could fire 15 rounds per minute, each shell equipped with its own electronic brain seeking targets. During one 52-minute period, Hugh W. Hadley's guns destroyed multiple kamikaze aircraft in succession, with the proximity fuses ensuring that even shells passing above or below the rapidly maneuvering aircraft would detonate effectively. The story of USS Aaron Ward during the May 3rd attacks illustrates the proximity fuse's role as a force multiplier. When 40 kamikaze aircraft attacked the destroyer, her 5-inch batteries fired continuously for 52 minutes. The VT-fused shells destroyed 6 attackers completely and damaged 5 others severely enough that they crashed into the sea. Commander William Saunders later testified that without proximity fuses, his ship would have been overwhelmed in the first 10 minutes. The ability to engage targets without precise range finding allowed Aaron Ward's guns to shift rapidly between multiple threats, something that would have been impossible with time-fused ammunition. These accounts were multiplied across the entire fleet. During the 10 major Kikusui operations from April 6 to June 22, 1945, Japanese forces launched approximately 1,900 aircraft in organized kamikaze attacks. American naval forces, primarily using VT-fused 5-inch shells, destroyed hundreds of these attackers before they could reach their targets. Statistics from the Operations Research Group showed that ships equipped with proximity-fused ammunition were 3 times more likely to survive concentrated kamikaze attacks than those relying primarily on conventional ammunition. The proximity fuse had transformed what should have been a catastrophic tactical innovation into a costly but manageable threat. The contrast in defensive philosophy became increasingly apparent as the campaign progressed. American forces continuously refined their proximity fuse tactics, discovering that VT shells were particularly effective when fired in patterns that created overlapping spheres of fragments. Ships began coordinating their fire to create what they called VT boxes, protective zones through which kamikaze aircraft had to fly. The Japanese, meanwhile, could only respond with tactical variations, dawn attacks, multi-axis approaches, mixing conventional and suicide aircraft. None of these variations could overcome the fundamental advantage of shells that knew when to explode. The production statistics told the story of industrial warfare at its apex. By June 1945, American factories were producing 70,000 proximity fuses per day. The entire war effort would see over 22 million proximity fuses manufactured, representing an investment exceeding $1 billion in 1940s currency. The Crosley Corporation alone employed 10,000 workers across 3 shifts, 7 days a week, in its manufacturing facilities. This massive investment proved worthwhile when Navy analysis indicated that proximity fuses prevented the loss of dozens of ships during the Okinawa campaign alone. Japanese industrial capacity, devastated by strategic bombing and resource shortages, could produce nothing comparable. While Japanese scientists had understood the proximity fuse concept, and German reports on Allied special ammunition had reached Japan via submarine, the nation lacked the industrial infrastructure to develop and mass-produce such sophisticated devices. The vacuum tube technology alone required precision manufacturing capabilities that Japan's war-ravaged industry could not achieve. Japanese radar development, critical for understanding proximity fuse principles, remained primitive compared to American systems. The Type 22 radar, Japan's most advanced naval set, operated at wavelengths that made miniaturization impossible even if manufacturing capacity had existed. The effectiveness of the proximity fuse influenced Japanese tactical doctrine in the campaign's final stages. By May 1945, Kamikaze pilots were instructed to approach American task forces at maximum altitude before diving vertically onto targets, hoping to minimize exposure to VT-fused anti-aircraft fire. This tactical adjustment, while reducing losses during approach, made accurate targeting nearly impossible. Ships could maneuver out of the dive path, and the high-altitude approach gave radar operators more time to track incoming aircraft. The attempted solution proved counterproductive. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commander of amphibious forces at Okinawa, credited proximity fuses with making the invasion possible. In a letter to the Chief of Naval Operations, Turner wrote, "Without the VT fuse, our losses from suicide attacks would have been unbearable." The Japanese kamikaze was a formidable weapon that could have changed the outcome of the Pacific War, if not for our technological superiority in anti-aircraft defense. His assessment was echoed by Admiral Mark Mitcher, whose flagship USS Bunker Hill survived a devastating kamikaze strike on May 11th, partly because proximity-fused fire destroyed 3 other attackers that would have finished the Admiral Ali Burke, Mitch's chief of staff, later recalled the effectiveness of proximity fuses during a 1978 interview. "When I went as chief of staff to Admiral Mitcher, who commanded the fast carrier task forces, all the 5-inch 38 and 5-inch 25 ammunition was fitted with VT fuses. And as you well know, those fuses knocked down enemy planes by the dozens. Had it not been for those fuses, our ship losses and casualties in the fast carriers in the last half of the war would have been enormously larger." The proximity fuse's impact extended beyond mere statistics. The technology fundamentally altered the morale equation that made kamikaze tactics viable. Japanese military doctrine assumed that the certainty of death for their pilots would be balanced by the near certainty of hitting enemy ships. When success rates dropped below 20% due to proximity-fused defenses, the exchange became unsustainable, even by the brutal calculus of suicide warfare. Young Japanese pilots, many of them university students drafted into the special attack units, began to understand that their deaths would likely achieve nothing. Letters recovered after the war revealed growing awareness among kamikaze pilots that American defenses had evolved beyond what their commanders had promised. Lieutenant Yukioka, leader of the first official kamikaze unit in October 1944, had achieved devastating success against escort carriers in Leyte Gulf, when proximity fuses comprised only 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition. By Okinawa, his successors faced a fundamentally different reality. Lieutenant Commander Goro Nonaka, leading the Thunder God's Corps equipped with Baka flying bombs, lost his entire squadron on March 21, 1945, without a single Baka reaching launch position. American fighters guided by radar intercept officers shot down all 18 Betty bombers carrying the weapons. But even if they had broken through, the wall of VT-fused anti-aircraft fire would have been impenetrable. The technical sophistication of the proximity fuse represented more than just superior manufacturing. The device embodied fundamental advances in electronics, material science, and systems integration that Japan could not match. The miniaturized vacuum tubes, manufactured by Sylvania and Raytheon, used special glass formulations that could withstand tremendous shock. The battery system, activated by the acceleration of firing, used an electrolyte that remained stable for months, then activated instantly when needed. The radio frequency was precisely calculated to minimize interference while maximizing detection range. Each element represented years of focused research backed by unlimited funding. Meanwhile, Japanese anti-aircraft defenses remained primitive. The Type 98 100mm anti-aircraft gun, Japan's best heavy WWII weapon, still relied on mechanical time fuses that required manual setting before each shot. Japanese naval vessels at Okinawa, including the super battleship Yamato during her final sortie, carried anti-aircraft ammunition that was technologically equivalent to what Americans had used at Pearl Harbor. When Yamato faced over 300 American aircraft on April 7, 1945, her 62 anti-aircraft guns fired thousands of rounds but shot down fewer than 10 attackers. The Americans lost just 10 aircraft while sinking the world's largest battleship, a stark demonstration of technological disparity. The proximity fuse also enabled new tactical innovations impossible with conventional ammunition. American destroyers developed the VT umbrella technique, firing proximity-fused shells in predetermined patterns above friendly ships under attack. The shells would detonate at set distances, creating a protective dome of fragments that kamikaze aircraft had to penetrate. This technique proved particularly effective against the Baka flying bombs, whose high speed made them nearly impossible to track with conventional fire control, but vulnerable to the wall of fragments created by VT patterns. During the entire Okinawa campaign from April 1 to June 22, 1945, the United States Navy expended approximately 150,000 proximity-fused 5-inch shells. The effectiveness was undeniable. While VT-fused ammunition represented 45% of heavy anti-aircraft ammunition fired, it accounted for the vast majority of confirmed kamikaze kills at longer ranges. Time-fused shells, comprising 55% of ammunition expended, proved effective primarily at close range, where accuracy was less critical. The mathematics demonstrated that proximity fuses were approximately 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional ammunition against kamikaze attacks. The human cost differential was equally dramatic. Ships that exhausted their VT ammunition and reverted to time-fused shells suffered casualty rates significantly higher during subsequent attacks. The destroyer USS Drexler, attacked after expending her proximity-fused ammunition on May 28, was sunk in less than a minute by 2 kamikaze aircraft that would likely have been destroyed by VT fire. Her 58 dead represented more casualties than many destroyers suffered during entire campaigns. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the Fifth Fleet, experienced the kamikaze threat personally when his flagship USS Indianapolis was hit in March, forcing him to transfer to USS New Mexico, which was also struck in May. He later wrote, "This is my second experience with a suicide plane making a hit on board my own ship, and I have seen 4 other ships hit near me. The suicide plane is a very effective weapon, which we must not underestimate." Yet Spruance also recognized that without proximity fuses, the kamikaze would have been far more devastating. The VT fuse has saved countless ships and lives. It is the margin between bearable and unbearable losses. The strategic implications were clear to military planners preparing for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. Intelligence estimates indicated that Japan had reserved approximately 10,000 aircraft for kamikaze attacks against the invasion fleet. However, American war planners, confident in proximity fuse effectiveness, calculated that defensive requirements could be met. Production of VT fuses was scheduled to reach 100,000 units daily by September 1945. New Mark 53 and Mark 58 fuses with improved sensitivity and reliability were entering mass production. The invasion fleet would have carried over 1 million proximity-fused shells, creating an anti-aircraft defense unprecedented in military history. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 ended the war before this climactic test could occur. But the proximity fuse's impact on Japanese surrender calculations should not be underestimated. Japanese military assessments captured after the war acknowledged the impossibility of successful defense against an invasion fleet protected by what they called electronic shells. Admiral Somu Toyota, chief of the Naval General Staff, testified after the war that the Japanese Navy had calculated that homeland defense kamikaze attacks would achieve less than 10% success rates against proximity-fused defenses, a rate that would make the tactic militarily worthless. Post-war analysis revealed the full scope of the proximity fuse achievement. The program had mobilized 112 companies, in addition to the main contractors, creating an industrial ecosystem dedicated to producing the most sophisticated military electronics of the era. British scientists who had conceived the original proximity fuse concept in 1940 but lacked resources for development, acknowledged that American industrial capability had achieved what they considered impossible. The British had concluded that making vacuum tubes survive gun launch was insurmountable. American engineers proved them wrong. The effectiveness of the proximity fuse against kamikaze attacks influenced military technology development for decades. The principle of smart munitions, weapons that could think for themselves, became central to American military doctrine. Modern anti-aircraft missiles use proximity fusing descended from the VT fuse, while the Phalanx close-in weapon system protecting today's warships operates on principles pioneered during the defense against kamikaze attacks. The technological superiority that defeated human guidance with electronic intelligence established a paradigm that continues to shape military strategy. Japanese veterans interviewed after the war expressed continued amazement at American proximity fuse technology. Commander Tadashi Nakajima, who helped establish the Kamikaze program, admitted, "We knew the Americans had superior technology, but the proximity fuse was beyond our imagination. Our pilots reported shells exploding exactly where they flew, as if guided by invisible hands. It destroyed not just our aircraft, but the fundamental premise of the special attack, that spiritual power could overcome material disadvantage." Captain Ichiro Ito, an early advocate of kamikaze tactics, survived the war and later reflected on the proximity fuse's impact. "We believed that the willingness to die would guarantee success. The American electronic fuse proved that technology could defeat even the most determined human sacrifice. It was not just a weapon, but a statement about the nature of modern warfare." The contrast between the proximity fuse and kamikaze attacks represented fundamentally different philosophies about the value of human life and the role of technology in warfare. The American investment in preserving life through superior technology stood against the Japanese willingness to expend life as a weapon itself. The proximity fuse, by making kamikaze attacks survivable for American forces, invalidated the cruel logic that drove young Japanese men to deliberate death. In this sense, the electronic fuse represented not just technological superiority, but a moral statement about how wars should be fought. The legacy of the proximity fuse in defeating kamikaze attacks extends beyond military history. The crash development program that created the VT fuse established the model for subsequent American technical achievements from the space program to modern computing. The collaboration between universities, private industry, and military requirements that produced 22 million sophisticated electronic devices under wartime pressure demonstrated American organizational capabilities that would define the post-war era. Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, where the proximity fuse was perfected, continued as a center of military technology innovation, developing everything from guided missiles to satellite navigation systems. Dr. Merl Tuve, who led the proximity fuse development, later reflected on the achievement. "We saved lives by making weapons more effective. Every kamikaze shot down by a proximity fuse meant American sailors who went home to their families. That was worth any amount of effort and expense." His team's success validated the American approach of applying scientific knowledge to military problems, a philosophy that would dominate defense strategy throughout the Cold War. For the Japanese, the failure of kamikaze tactics against proximity fused defenses marked the end of beliefs about spiritual superiority, overcoming material disadvantage. The young pilots who died in futile attacks against walls of VT-fused explosions became symbols not of noble sacrifice, but of military leadership that had failed to recognize technological reality. Modern Japan's emphasis on technological development and innovation can be traced partly to the harsh lessons of 1945, when electronic fuses defeated human pilots with mechanical precision. The mathematical precision of the proximity fuse's success translated into saved ships, preserved lives, and ultimately strategic victory. Each VT fuse that functioned correctly meant an American sailor who returned home, a ship that survived to fight another day, and proof that technology could provide decisive advantage in modern warfare. The confirmed destruction of hundreds of kamikaze aircraft by proximity fuses before reaching their targets represented thousands of American casualties prevented, dozens of ships saved, and validation of the billion-dollar investment in electronic warfare. The story of technology defeating fatalism reached its climax in the waters of Okinawa, where radar-guided fighters, proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells, and sophisticated damage control systems prevailed against deliberate suicide attacks. The kamikaze pilots, brave young men sacrificed to a lost cause, flew into an electronic killing field their commanders never anticipated. Their deaths, while achieving tactical damage that horrified American sailors, failed to achieve the strategic goal of making invasion costs unbearable. The proximity fuse had transformed their sacrifice from a devastating weapon into a manageable threat. Secretary of the Navy James Forstall summarized the proximity fuse's contribution. "The proximity fuse has helped blaze the trail to Japan. Without the protection this ingenious device has given the surface ships of the fleet, our westward push could not have been so swift, and the cost in men and ships would have been immeasurably greater." This assessment, shared by military leaders throughout the Pacific Theater, recognized that electronic intelligence had defeated human sacrifice. The final accounting was sobering yet decisive. During the entire Okinawa campaign, Japanese kamikaze attacks sank 36 American ships and damaged 36 others. Terrible as these losses were, they represented survival of the vast majority of ships attacked, a rate that would have been impossible without proximity fuses. The 4,097 American sailors killed by kamikaze at Okinawa, while representing the Navy's bloodiest battle, were a fraction of casualties that conventional analysis predicted without VT technology. Japanese losses were absolute. Approximately 1,900 aircraft and pilots were expended in organized kamikaze attacks during the 10 Kikusui operations, plus hundreds more in improvised suicide attempts, achieving tactical results that fell far short of strategic requirements. The proximity fuse's victory over kamikaze attacks demonstrated that in modern warfare, technological superiority could overcome advantages in numbers, determination, or even willingness to die. American sailors manning 5-inch guns with VT ammunition held a decisive advantage over Japanese pilots sealed in cockpits for one-way missions. The miniaturized radio transmitter in each shell's nose represented industrial capacity, scientific knowledge, and organizational capability that no amount of martial spirit could match. When the electronic fuse met the human pilot in the skies over Okinawa, the outcome was predetermined by factories in Cincinnati, laboratories in Maryland, and the fundamental American belief that technology could preserve life while achieving victory. The mathematical reality was inescapable. A proximity fuse weighing less than 5 pounds, containing 130 electronic components manufactured for 18 by 1945 and functioning for less than 30 seconds, could destroy a kamikaze aircraft with its pilot, representing years of training, tons of aluminum and steel, and most tragically, a human life that could never be replaced. When multiplied across thousands of engagements throughout the Pacific Theater, this equation translated into American victory through technological superiority that helped determine the war's outcome. The proximity fuse's success against kamikaze attacks validated the entire American approach to warfare in the 20th century. Investment in technology, faith in industrial production, and belief that superior equipment could overcome fanatical determination proved correct in the most extreme test imaginable. For Japan, the failure of the kamikaze against proximity fuse defenses represented not just military defeat, but invalidation of core beliefs about spirit triumphing over matter. The electronic fuse had defeated the divine wind, proving that in the crucible of modern warfare, advanced technology would triumph over human sacrifice. The Pacific War demonstrated that in modern naval warfare, the ability to destroy aircraft at distance determined survival. Nations that could design, produce, and deploy superior defensive technology held decisive advantages over those relying on human courage alone. The proximity fuse versus kamikaze comparison illustrates this principle at the most fundamental level. American electronic sophistication defeating Japanese human sacrifice. The VT fuse's success at Okinawa established technological superiority as the determining factor in military effectiveness. The contrast between American and Japanese approaches to anti-aircraft defense ultimately tells a larger story about industrial warfare in the 20th century. Nations that could marshal scientific knowledge, manufacturing capability, and organizational expertise to produce superior military technology held insurmountable advantages. The proximity fuse represented the culmination of American strengths, innovative engineering, mass production, and systematic problem-solving applied to military challenges. Its triumph over the kamikaze demonstrated conclusively that in modern war, victory belonged to those who could think, build, and deploy better technology. The mathematical precision of the proximity fuse's effectiveness, 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional ammunition, reducing required rounds per kill by 73%, preventing the loss of countless ships, translated into strategic victory that preserved American lives while defeating a determined enemy. This differential, multiplied across the vast Pacific Theater, helped secure American victory and establish technological superiority as the foundation of post-war military doctrine. The electronic fuse had not just defeated the kamikaze, it had validated the entire American approach to warfare through superior technology, proving definitively that in matters of life and death, quality of equipment could overcome quantity of sacrifice.